Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala rasulillah. Welcome to Face to Floor. I'm Brother Ali, and we are today going to cover the 8th segment from our series, the explanation of the guiding creed, the Aqidah of Ibn Asakir. Today, inshallah, we're going to talk about Islam, continue with our topic about Islam and the role of the intellect, and we're going to talk about philosophy. And inshallah, we'll clarify what we mean by that term. And also, we will talk some about what's called tashbih, and establish that the Sunni orthodoxy, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, has established a balance between the use of reason and understanding revelation. And inshallah, all of that we will clarify. Let us briefly review what we covered in our last couple of lessons. A couple of lessons ago, we talked in particular about the sources of knowledge. And inshallah, you can go back to lesson 6 and check that out. But in brief, I'll give you a quick summary. In Islam, we understand that there are 3 sources of knowledge: the sound senses, meaning the healthy senses, the reliable report, and the reason, the intellect. And we mentioned regarding the reliable report, it's subdivided into 2 categories. The mass witnessed and mass transmitted report, what's called mutawatir report, meaning an event was witnessed by a large number of people, it was transmitted to a large number of people, and consistently done so in a manner that the reasonable person, he accepts that this event, this report is authentic. And we also mentioned regarding the reliable report is the prophetic report, that the prophets, alayhimussalam, one of their attributes is that they are always truthful, and when they may tell us things, although may come from one person, we accept it. Like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he informed us about the Day of Judgment, for example. He informed us about the interrogation, the questioning in the grave. He informed us about the matters of what is halal, what is permissible, and what is haram, what is forbidden. So although this message is coming to us from one person, we accept it because he's a prophet. And we did mention how prophets prove that they are prophets by the performance of miracles. And inshallah, in the previous lesson 6, we went into some detail about that. In the last lesson, we talked about, or the third source of knowledge we said is the use of reason. And that also is divided into 2 subcategories. One is what is known intuitively, and by intuition here we don't mean just a hunch or a feeling, but something which is known immediately by the mind without having to go through a series of steps to realize that conclusion. The example was mentioned that a part of something has to be smaller than the entirety of that thing. A slice of pizza, for example, has to be smaller than the entire pizza itself. So this is something that once a person understands the terms, he or she immediately understands the conclusion. We're talking about a person of sound mind, of course. And also the reasoning, meaning going through a series of deduction, going through a series of steps. For example, if A is larger than B and B is larger than C, then by necessity, A would be larger than C. This is going through a process of deduction. So this is how things are known. That was covering the sources of knowledge. And then we mentioned regarding the mind and the intellect, we mentioned in our last lesson, we talked about the rational judgments. We said that they are also divided into 3. There is what is called the rational necessity, that which the sound mind says must exist, and this refers to the Creator, Allah, and the Creator's attributes. So the mind, the intellect, it knows that there must be a Creator, and the Creator would have no beginning, would have no ending, that there would only be one Creator, that the Creator would not be in need, that the Creator would be knowledgeable, would be powerful, that the Creator would not be similar to what is created, that the Creator would have the attributes of befitting perfection. And we talked in detail about this topic the last lesson. And the second category of the rational judgments, among the rational judgments, is the rational impossibility. It is that which the mind says does not have the potential to exist under any circumstances. And when by saying the phrase rationally impossible, we don't mean something that's merely uncustomary or unfamiliar to us, or something that might be regarded as far-fetched, but meaning that this thing, under no circumstance could this thing exist. For example, a square that is a circle. It's contrary to its definition. Or the mother, or let's say the daughter giving birth to her own mother. These are rational impossibilities because the statement itself is a contradiction. And then we mentioned the third of the rational judgments is the rational possibility. It is that which the mind says, this thing has the potential to exist at one time, and it has the potential not to exist at another time. And this refers to the entire creation. And that includes both what is customary, what is familiar to us, what is unfamiliar to us, what may be beyond our senses. All of that all those things are classified as rationally possible. And also including that among the uncustomary, the miracles of the prophets, alayhimus salam, for example. They are, by definition, extraordinary, but they are not regarded by the mind, they are not regarded by reason to be something impossible. It's just something contrary to the norm. So those were the sources of knowledge. And inshallah, today we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about philosophy and the position of Ahl Sunnah, the position of the Sunni orthodoxy versus philosophy, and the other extreme will be the sect called the ideology of the Mushabbihah, those who resemble the Creator to the creations. Now, when using the term philosophy here, using it in the Islamic traditional sense, meaning the people who may have called themselves Muslims, but they were under the influence of ancient Greek philosophy. And we'll mention some of these people. Now, with a brief background on that, often, I mean, now with the internet era, it's a little bit different, but certainly prior to the internet era, if a person were trying to learn about Islam, he often or she often would find it very difficult to find anything even remotely close to traditional Islamic knowledge. A lot of the writings about Islam that were available came from the Orientalists. Now, when we say the Orientalists here, we don't mean the Orient merely what is called the Far East, like Korea, Japan, China, but whatever was to the Orient, to the east of Europe, and immediately to the east of Europe, of course, are the lands of the Muslims. So during the era of colonialism, when the Europeans were occupying Muslim lands, they had their academics, their scholars, and they studied Islam. They studied Islamic culture, Islamic history, Islamic civilization, and they studied it not to learn more about Islam because they wanted to become Muslim, but rather they were studying it so that they could dominate the Muslim lands and manipulate the people. So the school of Orientalism, in a nutshell, was, and it still exists today, they call it like regional studies, for example. They may have courses in the university or majors in the university, Middle Eastern studies, for instance. The objective originally for this was to assist the colonial powers to maintain domination over their Muslim subjects in the various parts of the Muslim world. So that was the purpose of Orientalism. And until today, the distortions about Islam can still be seen. The legacy of Orientalism is still very common in the mainstream media even. You see how Muslims are represented, and some of it is intentional distortion, and other distortions may not be intentional, but it's part of the legacy of Orientalism. And another branch of Orientalism also, of course, would be related to the missionaries. The Christian missionaries who came into the Muslim world, they usually were very unsuccessful in converting the local Muslim populations. But they did study Islam. But they studied it, and very often the purpose for their study of Islam was to try to cast doubt into the hearts of the Muslims. Often a lot of the Muslims would be lay Muslims, common Muslims, who may be very, very, very ignorant of the religion. So these Orientalists, these missionary Orientalists, they would go into the lands of the Muslims, and they would bring up issues. And you find that even till today, you find, for example, a movement of people who reject hadith rejectors, if you wish, that they revive different theological or historical controversies, and they try to cast doubt into the hearts and minds of people, Muslims who are not learned. And this is has been the methodology of the Orientalists, whether we're talking 100, 150 years ago, or people who are following their example today. So be aware of these people. And alhamdulillah, the Sunnis have no doubt that Ahl Sunnah, that the Sunni orthodoxy, meaning what is correct, when we say orthodox, we mean what is correct, that the Sunni orthodoxy, the people of knowledge, have clear-cut responses to these different controversies. The people who bring up these controversies, typically they are doing it to cause doubt or try to cause doubt in people who do not have an adequate level of knowledge. And this is why it's so important for us to learn the religion. For one, so one can protect himself or herself, and also to protect the religion in general from those who may try to corrupt the religion. And also, so when one has knowledge, God willing, this person, he can better convey the message to people who are not Muslim. So this is part of our mission here at Face the Floor, is to educate the public, both the Muslim public and the non-Muslim public, about Islam. Okay, going back to the Orientalists. Typically in the university, if a person is taking Islam 101 or maybe some slightly more advanced classes, one will find that the way Islam is presented, they don't present it from the point of view of, well, there is a Sunni orthodoxy, this is what it is, this is what the Sunni majority believes, this is how they respond to various heretical, meaning deviant factions. They don't present it this way. Typically they present a multitude of different factions. They'll mention various Shiite factions. They will mention a multitude of different nationalistic movements that have taken place or are taking place in the Muslim world. They will mention what they will call Islamic feminism. They will have different cultures. They'll present Islam as a cultural phenomenon. This is how they present Islam typically in the universities. And it leads a person who may be trying to learn the truth, it just leads to more and more confusion. Because the person will look at all these different groups and the issues of the creed, and this is why we emphasize here at Face the Floor the matters of the creed so much. Because it's in the creed that a person gets the clarity, so that they can understand who's who, what's right, how do I know who is right? It's by going back and taking it to the matters of the creed. So in the universities, like we said, that typically the Sunni creed, if it is mentioned, often it is glossed over, just passed over, and then it's put in with a massive mixture of all these different types of factions and sub-factions and sects. And mashallah, typically it leads a person more confused than when they started studying those classes. Now, among these people, when a person is, if he's trying to study Islam in the university, which I would not recommend, because it's not going to lead a person usually to find the truth, that among the, if you wish, the darlings of the Orientalists, and again, Orientalism like what is taught in the universities, because basically it's a modern form of Orientalism, that among the darlings of the Orientalists will be the philosophers. You had different people, as we said, when Islam spread in the early centuries, first couple of centuries, Muslims encountered lots of different cultures, lots of different religions, lots of different ideas and ideologies. And some of the works of the ancient thinkers were translated. So for example, many of the works of the Greek writers and thinkers were translated. They were made available in particular in the Arabic language. Some people also wrote in Persian in the Muslim world, but primarily in the Arabic language. Some people were so impressed by certain aspects of Greek thinking, like in particular in mathematics and in geometry, the precision of thought. Some people, because of a weakness in their mind in reality, they became so impressed by some elements of Greek thought that they embraced much of it in its entirety. So as a result, they adopted some of the ideas, in particular from Aristotle, the Greek philosopher Aristotle, and the Greek philosopher, his teacher, Plato. And they mixed some of these ideas in with the teachings of Islam. Among these people, there was a person, this is ascribed in particular, the first it is ascribed to is a person named Al-Kindi. There was also another philosopher named Ar-Razi. This Razi, he died in the 900s of the Western calendar. This is not the same person, Fakhruddin Ar-Razi, the famous Sunni theologian, scholar of Aqidah, and other sciences, the science of tafsir, Quranic explanation, exegesis. He lived several centuries later. Also among these people that are labeled so-called Muslim philosophers, and really one should not call them Muslim philosophers because they did not have the belief of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Also among them, probably the most famous among them is Ibn Sina or Avicenna, and he's very famous for medicine, but also he's very famous for promoting Greek philosophy. And really the last of the major ones was Ibn Rushd from Spain. And Ibn Rushd, we're talking about the philosopher, not the father or the grandfather, I don't remember now, who was a famous Maliki scholar. But these people, and people who were influenced by them, they promoted Aristotelian philosophy. Now, as a side note here, when these books were being made available, the works of the Greeks were being made available in the Muslim world, some of those works reached the Christian world. Now, for the Muslims, the scholars, the Sunni scholars, they studied the beliefs of these Greek philosophers and those who followed them, and they discredited them, they dismantled them, using proofs from the Quran, using proofs from the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, using proofs from the early Muslims, and also using the proofs of the aql, of the intellect. Now, in the West, in Christendom, in Europe, in Christian Europe that is, that there was a movement called scholasticism. Now, scholasticism was an effort for the Christians because with them acquiring the books of the ancient Greeks, with acquiring the books of the ancient Greeks and reading about philosophy and reading about logic, that they tried to reconcile their belief, meaning their Christian doctrine. They tried to reconcile their Christian doctrine with logic, and it was an utter failure because the basis of the Christian doctrine is based on an absurdity to say that God is one, but also God is three distinct entities, but those three distinct entities is one single entity. This is something absurd. Also, it is absurd to claim that God is beginningless, hence God would not be subject to change, but then to claim that God, an infant, meaning Jesus, alayhi salam, that an infant became God, and that God became an infant. And to the point that one of their most famous scholars, known as Saint Anselm of Canterbury, he wrote a book called Why God Became a Man. Why God Became a Man, he wrote, this was the title of his book. So somebody who is thinking that the creator of the universe is a human being, and that a human being is the creator of the universe, this is something, these are, as we said earlier about rational impossibilities, these are mutually exclusive propositions. The one who is originated, who has a beginning, cannot become God. Because God, when we speak of God the Creator, we mean the one who has no beginning, the one who is the originator of everything, and is not himself, no gender intended, and himself is not, he himself is not originated. The Creator is the originator of everything, and is not originated. Hence, that which is originated, Jesus for instance, could not become unoriginated, meaning without a beginning. The one who has a beginning cannot become beginningless. So this movement of scholasticism, it was a failure. And in European history, eventually there was a split. Meaning, as we said in one of our lectures called The Atheist Delusion, you had a split where the intellectuals, the thinkers, the scientists, the philosophers, they went in one direction, and the church, well, it stayed on its course. And in time, we see what happened to European civilization, as we see the church, the Western church, is almost in its death throes, and atheism and materialism, whether scientific materialism or consumer materialism, has basically taken over Western civilization, and Christianity is taking a back seat, or maybe it's even in the trunk, so to speak. So that happened for the West. Now with Islam, alhamdulillah, we had the people who defended the creed of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah against various deviant factions. And inshallah we will mention one of them, among the most famous who refuted the Greek philosophers was a great scholar named Al-Ghazali. And he wrote a book, Tahafatul Falasafah, which means the incoherence, the nonsense of the philosophers. And in his book, he outlined, he wrote an extensive refutation, let's say. He wrote an extensive refutation of the Greek philosophers. Now, we regard the philosophers as blasphemers, meaning the Sunnis, Ahl Sunnah, on 3 points. One point is that the philosophers, they made the blasphemous claim that the universe is beginningless. And this contradicts what is a core part of the religion. The Quran, Allah Ta'ala revealed وَخَلَقَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ, that Allah has created everything. So that which is created has a beginning. So the philosophers, they claimed that the universe is without a beginning. So they belied the Quran, which is blasphemy. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was asked about the Genesis, the beginning of creation, he said, "Kana Allahu wa lam yakun shay'un ghayruh." He said that God was, the Creator was, and there was nothing else. No time, no space, no light, no darkness, no distance, no direction. The Creator was, and there was nothing else. So only Allah exists without a beginning. And everything other than Allah exists with a beginning. Allah is the Creator, and everything else is a creation. This is the belief of the Muslims. So the philosophers, they went astray on this issue by claiming that the universe is without a beginning. This is not something that is taken from the Quran, obviously, or from the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was something that the philosophers, this was a premise, this was a starting point that they came up with in their minds. They came up with this idea, and then they twisted and distorted different verses of the Quran to try to justify their bad belief. So this was one issue. They claimed, the philosophers claimed that the universe was beginningless. Another deviation of theirs was that they claimed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not know everything. They said that Allah knows the generalities of things, but not the details of things. So for instance, they would claim that God knows that, or God knew, according to them, that He would create, that there would be a species of beings called humans. That there would be a species called humans, but Allah Ta'ala would not know the details of what each human being would do, which of course contradicts the Quran. It contradicts what the Prophet taught, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it contradicts what the intellect says, what is necessitated by the intellect. Allah Ta'ala revealed, "Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim," that certainly Allah has knowledge of all things. This is an explicit verse, and there are a multitude of verses in the Quran that tell us that Allah Ta'ala has knowledge of everything. So these people, by claiming Allah Ta'ala does not know the details of everything, this was another example of the blasphemy of the philosophers. And another blasphemy of theirs, where they belied the religion, is that they claimed that the pleasures of paradise and the tortures of hell are not in body but only in soul. Muslims, we believe in an actual physical resurrection where the physical body, if it's a body that decayed, because some of the bodies, some, like for example of the prophets and some of the ultra-righteous Muslims, their bodies will not decay. The martyrs of the battlefield, that those people, their bodies will not decay. So the people in general, their bodies will decay, and on the day of judgment, people will be resurrected in body and in soul. The philosophers belied the Quran by claiming that the afterlife, or the pleasures of the afterlife, they claim that the pleasures of the afterlife were merely spiritual and not physical. So this was another example of their blasphemy. So these are some of the strayings of the philosophers. And the Sunnis, like we said, Al-Ghazali and others, refuted them and exposed their beliefs. They studied their beliefs to refute them. It's not the case that they studied their beliefs and then adopted their beliefs. But instead, when you are debating with an opponent, you need to know the positions of your opponent. You need to know, as I say, where is he coming from. So by studying their positions, the positions of the philosophers, the Sunnis, they discredited them. They showed the internal inconsistencies where the philosophers were contradicting themselves as well as contradicting the religion. Now, we mentioned before another group that was also influenced by some of the philosophical ideas was a sect known as the Mu'tazila. And like the philosophers, and we're going to talk about the Mu'tazila in more detail in some of the future lessons, but just to kind of summarize their misguidance. Like the philosophers, they started with assumptions, premises, that were from their intellect, from their mind. And then they built their aqidah, their doctrine, around these premises, which in reality contradict what the religion teaches. And we're going to mention some specific issues about the matters of destiny in some future lessons, God willing. But just to show that there is a similarity between the philosophers and the Mu'tazila sect. Now, the other extreme of the spectrum is the movement, the ideology of the Mushabbihah. These are people who believe in the doctrine of tashbih. Tashbih means to have the conviction that the Creator is similar to the creations. Whether the person says God is similar to the creations. For example, this is the belief of Louis Farrakhan and the so-called Nation of Islam. Inshallah, we have a video on that topic. You can check it out. Inshallah, if I remember, I'll put the link for the video. But here on Face the Floor, we have a video that refutes them and goes into some detail about their doctrine. That this sect, they claim, the so-called Nation of Islam, they claim that God is a human being who was born to a white woman in the year 1877. This is blasphemy bila shak, without a doubt. Allah Ta'ala revealed, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ, which means that God is beyond all comparison and has no equal. So God is not a human, is not anything like a human. The verse before that tells us, لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ, that God does not give birth and was not born. God does not give birth or father offspring, and God is not the offspring of anyone or anything. So the nation, as we call them, the so-called Nation of Islam, they claim that God was born more than 100 years ago. This is not the belief of the Muslims. So they are explicit. They outright announce their tashbih. You have other people who they may say by their tongue, God is not like any of the creations. But at the same time, they believe, for example, that God has a shape, has a form, occupies space, undergoes change. All of that is included under the tashbih, of resembling the Creator unto the creation. Even if such people don't really, they don't think that they are resembling God to the creations. But if they think that Allah Ta'ala is in a direction, or has dimensions, or has a size, for instance, this person in reality, they are no different than the one who worships an idol. In reality, they are no different from an idol worshiper. Both of them are praying to forms. Both of them are praying to things that have dimensions. Both of them are praying to things that occupy space. And Allah Ta'ala is absolutely dissimilar, unlike the creations. As Allah Ta'ala revealed in the Quran, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, which means there is absolutely nothing like Allah whatsoever. So we mentioned, let's mention another point about the people who resemble Allah unto the creations. That whereas the philosophers and the Mu'tazilah, they put their intellect ahead of revelation. They had certain things they started off with in their mind, and then they tried to give warped interpretations to the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If they recognized and accepted the sayings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they tried to twist and distort them to fit with certain philosophical ideas that they had. The Mushabbihah, the people who resemble Allah to the creations, they went another direction. They said, we don't use our minds at all. So they would read the revelation without using their intellect. And then they would insist on interpreting verses literally that should not be interpreted literally. And as a result, they end up with all kinds of contradictions. Among them, for example, in our time, the most notorious of the factions or groups of Tashbih would be the Wahhabis. The Wahhabis are a sect that was started in the mid-1700s of the Western calendar. They come from a region of Central Eastern Arabia. And this sect is among the sect of the Mushabbihah sect. Also, they are people of Tajsim, believing that God is an object. That this movement started about 250 years ago. And this Wahhabi movement, now they refer to themselves as Salafis, typically. The Wahhabis usually don't refer to themselves as Wahhabis, although some of them do. But usually they call themselves Salafis. And what you see of the madness with the so-called ISIS movement, so-called Boko Haram, so-called Ansarud-Din, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, that these are factions that are under the influence of Wahhabi ideology. They do, although the media and these sects claim to be Sunni Muslims. The Sunnis, we regard the one who believes that God is an object or has a shape or a form or location. It is the belief of the Muslims to deem such a belief blasphemy. And it should be clear and it should be unambiguous. Now also, here, alhamdulillah, at Face to Floor, we did a 3-part series on the history of the Wahhabis, the doctrine of the Wahhabis, and the contradictions of the Wahhabis. And that's also here, inshallah, I will provide a link. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. But in summary, they are a group, the Wahhabis, so-called Salafis. They are a group of people from the Mushabbihah sect. It is a movement that started about 250 years ago. In reality, it is not a Sunni movement, but in reality it is a movement that masquerades as Muslims while calling people to worship a giant object. And Muslims, we say God is free of shape, form, distance, direction, all spatiality, all corporeality, all the density, motion, all of these things that we associate with bodies, objects, energy, all of those types of characteristics, Allah Ta'ala is free from all of those. The Creator really does not resemble the creations. This is the belief of the Muslims. Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, he said, أَنَّا يُشْبِهُ الْخَالِقُ مَخْلُوقَهُ, that certainly, undoubtedly, the Creator does not resemble the creations. This is the belief of the Muslims. So now let's go back to the issue as we summarize about the intellect. We said that there were the philosophers and the Mu'tazila who gave priority to the intellect over revelation. You had the other extreme with the Mushabbihah, the people who believe God is an object, and they said that we just read the revelation as it is, meaning we take it literally without giving any figurative interpretation. And because what is the basis of their belief is that God is a giant object. Many of them believe God is situated above the ceiling of paradise, but then they'll tell you that God is literally situated in the most high location, but at night God literally goes beneath where Jesus is located. Muslims believe Jesus is in the second heaven. The Wahhabis, for example, they believe God comes down to the first heaven. So we believe the second heaven is higher than the first heaven. They will tell you that God literally goes down to the first heaven, but He is also at the same time above everything else. This is absurd. I mean, this is because they are reading verses of Quran and they are reading hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they don't know what the right belief is to start with. The Muslim belief is in the middle between the philosophers and Mu'tazila and the Resemblers. We say that we use our intellect, this faculty, the aql, we use our intellect to understand the revelation, and that there is nothing in the revelation that contradicts reason. There is nothing in the revelation that contradicts reason. The belief in one creator who has no beginning, who has no end, who has no need, who has no similarity, this doesn't contradict the mind. This fits with the mind, the intellect, as we've mentioned in multiple lessons now, that the intellect says that there has to be a creator. And since the creator is the creator who existed before the creation, then we know that the creator does not need the creations. And also, it would be known to the one who uses the mind that the creator does not resemble the creations. Now, when I mention this, sometimes the so-called Salafis, the Wahhabis, they will accuse the Muslims of indulging in philosophy. When we mention that the Creator is not subject to time or space or directions. But our premises, although they can be known by the intellect, these premises are also known from the Quran. Allah Ta'ala revealed, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَغَنِيٌّ عَنِ الْعَالَمِينَ, that certainly, emphatically, the Creator does not need the creations. This is from the Quran. Allah Ta'ala revealed, هُوَ الْأَوَّلِ, that Allah Ta'ala existed without a beginning, that Allah Ta'ala's existence is beginningless. That verse tells us that Allah alone is beginningless. So, since we know that God existed before creation, then we know that Allah Ta'ala does not need the creations. Allah Ta'ala revealed also Allahu Samad, that Allah is not dependent upon any of the creations, and all the creations are dependent upon Allah. So when a person understands that the Creator existed before the creation, this is mentioned in the Quran, so it's not just, it is something that can be demonstrated by reason, but for a person, for instance, if we are talking to a person who is not a Muslim, he does not, if I quote the Quran, he might not even know what the Quran is. So how do we demonstrate the truthfulness of the Muslim belief to the person who is not a Muslim? Rationally, you may have a person who's coming from an intellectual and academic sort of background. How do you rationally demonstrate that Islam is the true religion? How do we demonstrate that Muslims have the proper belief in the Creator? You would use rational proofs, because this person agrees to you, presumably, this person agrees to use reason. So, okay, it is established in the Quran that Allah is beginningless. It is established in the Quran that Allah does not need the creations. But we can also demonstrate that rationally, because, as was just said, that the Creator existed before creation, without mentioning what the Quran says, without mentioning what the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And since the Creator existed before the creations, logically, we know the Creator does not need the creations. So the Creator existed before time, before space, before light, before darkness, before distance, before direction. So that means God is not something that would be dependent upon space or time or distance or direction. The one who existed before space, before dimensions, would not have a size. The one who does not have a size would not be in a place. Because whatever exists in a place, it has dimensions, it has a certain size. The Creator, Allah Ta'ala, does not have a size, does not have a shape, does not have a place. So this is something that can be demonstrated rationally. The person, many people believe that God is inside heaven. They believe God is situated in either heaven, the heavens, we say the as-samawat, or inside of paradise. The Creator is the Creator of both. Allah existed before the heavens, before paradise, before any distance, before any direction, before any place. And the one who existed before place, without being situated in a place, exists after creating place, still exists without being in a place. This is the Muslim belief. So this is something that can be rationally demonstrated. But it is not just a theory that we just had in our mind, that we just had an idea, and then we try to make the religion fit with our ideas. Because it is a false accusation of the so-called Salafi movement, that they'll say, oh, you Sunnis, the real Sunnis, meaning the Ash'aris and the Maturidis. They will say that you Sunnis, you are, or you Ash'aris, or you Maturidis, they will say you were indulging in philosophy. Because they know that their belief, meaning talking about the so-called Salafis, that they know that their belief is absurd. They know that what they are claiming, it contradicts the Quran, it contradicts the judgment of reason, and their creed contradicts itself. It is internally inconsistent. So they know that about themselves. So since what they believe does not add up, meaning it's not rationally consistent, it contradicts reason, then they dismiss the use of reason altogether. And this is really, if one wants to understand what is the fuel behind this extremism in the name of Sunni Islam, so-called Sunni Islam. It is this ideology. You're dealing with a group of fanatical people who refuse to use reason. So you're dealing with a group of people who will tell you, some of them will tell you straightforward, I don't use my mind. They will say it like that. I don't use my mind. So if you're dealing with people like that who say, I don't use my mind, then it's very easy to understand how such a, if you wish, mindset will lead to fanaticism and lead to extremism and lead to the barbarism that you see these people committing almost, well, here in the West even, almost weekly in the name of Islam. So let us conclude, inshallah, that we mentioned today that the Sunni position is between two extremes. There is the position of those who give priority to the intellect over revelation, and then you have, as we just mentioned, those who resemble the Creator to the creations, that they reject the use of the intellect altogether. And the Sunnis are in the middle, that we use our intellect to understand the revelation. And we also talked briefly about what's called Orientalism and some of the early, what are referred to, although they're not in reality, but are referred to as Muslim philosophers that were like Ibn Sina, for example. So their position, we mentioned some of their deviation. The Sunnis, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, we are a middle people. We are between the extremes. Inshallah, we'll stop here today. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala rasulillah. If anybody has any questions or comments, please share them here on the YouTube channel, or else at the blog site. And the blog site is face2floor.wordpress.com. Please like and share these videos. The success of this project is really in your hands. With your support, inshallah ta'ala, this we can continue to produce videos and mashallah do some nice things for the sake of Allah. Please support, as we said, please share and let people know. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala rasulillah.